Happy New Year to all of you. I wish we were in person, but I know we're adapting as we are used to now doing, given the COVID concerns. So I'm really glad that you were all able to join us remotely. I'm going to just explain very briefly why we convened this group and what the purpose of this roundtable is, and then I'm going to pass it over to my friend Phil Weiser, because I know he's pressed for time. But we wanted to bring together this group because what is very apparent is that our country and our democracy faces a lot of challenges that it doesn't in the past. This is a democracy on voting rights, attempts to disenfranchise numerous communities across the country, things that we haven't had to deal with. Some people have had to deal with in decades past, but some new challenges too. So in that spirit, I really wanted to push forward and renew American democracy through direct action, through intentional and deliberate engagement throughout our community, and then we have to work together as a community to make sure that we are protecting the right to vote. And we are protecting free and open society and committing to that foundational principle of equality. So that's the idea behind that. This is the front this year to have this conversation, to engage with the community, and to identify ways people can take. So before I introduce the other attendees, I do want to pass who is committed to protecting the right to vote. And to make sure that people have the ability to access that franchise, and has been an incredible leader for our state in the years since he's entered office. So Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. And sorry I can't spend more time, but I wanted to be here, particularly because when I think of January 6th, there's a lot that comes to mind. At the top of the list is, Jason, your safety, and the fact that you showed bravery that day, and that you confronted in its purest form an attack on our democratic republic itself. What we cannot ever forget is that January 6th is not a one-off, unique event. It was the effort to undermine the peaceful transition of power, which means it's one of the darkest days in American history. That had never happened before, and it could happen again. We have two sets of challenges. One, the set of challenge around how do we enable people to vote safely, freely, securely, like we do in Colorado. And we can't take for granted the voting system we have here. The premise of living in a democratic society is that every vote needs to be counted and that the will of people needs to be heard. And that means we need to protect the franchise. And I've worked to do that as Attorney General through multiple ways, voting rights, litigation, promoting effective protections at the federal level. Now the Voting Rights Act was gutted, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that I know Congressman Crow has been so supportive of. We also need to, again, keep developing, protecting the Colorado model, which is a national model. We've got our county clerk here, Joan Lopez. We need to support those efforts and support election workers who are facing threats like never before. The January 6th challenge is a newer challenge. Can we count on the lawful administration of elections, the responsible counting of ballots, and the responsible behavior of political actors? I had the chance to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court, this is during the pandemic, involving faithless electors. And I was asked a question in that argument: what would happen if a state legislature sought to overturn the will of voters after Election Day and reallocate electors to a different candidate? That wasn't before the court in the case, but it was a relevant issue because the question before the court was, what is the exact extent of the authority that state legislatures have over electors? And I said they can tell electors they need to do what they said they're going to do. They need to vote for the will of the people. That's what Colorado requires. That's now something that the Supreme Court has given its imprimatur to. That case did not decide the scary issue that could come back before the court. Could a state undermine the will of the people and pick a different winner than the people picked? That is a threat we face. If we are not prepared to defend our democracy, we have to be prepared to potentially lose our democracy. And the threats around voting rights being undermined and the threats around election administration being undermined are as high as they may have ever been, certainly in recent history. And the threats to the administration of elections is probably more than it's ever been. We're here in Colorado. We're a model on both fronts for the United States of America. We have to celebrate that model. We have to promote that model and do our work to defend our democracy. And in Jason Crow and in all of you, we have people committed to that defense. And it's an honor to be able to join you for a little bit, share a few words, and appreciate all of you. So this is about equal justice under law. It's about the rule of law. It's about e pluribus unum. From many, we are one. I don't take those things for granted. It's an honor to work with you on them. Back to you, Congressman.
Very much, General Weiser. You're a friend, but also just an incredible advocate and defender of the Constitution, both state and federal, in our state. And it's an honor to have you join us. And I could not have said it better myself. You always really get right to the rub of the issue. So thank you very much, Phil. Okay, so what a great start to this roundtable. To frame up the questions, I'm going to run through and introduce everybody first. And then after I do, I'm going to pose a couple of questions for the group. And you don't have to answer those questions directly. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about, but it certainly would provide some framing to it if you should choose to. So we already had Attorney General Phil Weiser give us great kickoff words. We have Joan Lopez, the Arapahoe County Clerk and Recorder. Thank you, Joan, for joining us. We have Omar Montgomery, the president of the Aurora NAACP. Omar, thank you, my friend, for joining. Harry Budisidharta, the executive joining us. Beth Hendrix, the executive director of the League of Women Voters. Beth, good to see you, and thank you for joining us today. Perkins, CleanSlateNow. Thank you, Owen, my longtime friend. It's good to see you. Cameron Hill, the Associate Director for Common Cause. Cameron, pleasure to have you join us. Stephanie Walsh, a high school civics teacher. And I'm particularly interested in what Stephanie's going to talk to us about today, because so much of this is about education and youth engagement. So thank you for joining us, Stephanie. Dr. Bobby Pace, the Vice President of Academic Success at Aurora Community College. Thank you, Bobby, as always, for joining us. Lisa Duran, the Executive Director of the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. Thank you so much, Lisa. We also have Salvador Hernandez, the State Director of Familia, Vota. I see Salvador's on with us here. I don't see his video on, but it looks like he has joined us. And of course, from my office, we have Ali DeWillis-Marcano. Thank you, Ali, for help putting this together and organizing it, as well as Matham El-Shadood, my Deputy Chief of Staff and District Director. So that's I think that's everybody. I don't think I missed anyone. So with that, here are the two kind of framing questions. And the Attorney General already touched on some of this. Number one is, what are those dangers? What are the threats that we face, both new and old threats to our community and to the right to vote and to our democracy and to vulnerable communities within college? The second is, what are the discrete actions we can take? Right? Because it's one thing to identify the threat. It's another to say, what can we do? What can anybody throughout our community, what can any Coloradan do over the next year to help address that and take action and reaffirm commitment to democracy? Those are two things in particular I would love to hear from you all, but of course, you can take it whatever direction you want to take it. So with that, let me just run through the list as I have it. And if you want to give a couple of minutes of opening remarks and address those issues, we would love to have it. So Joan Lopez, the Arapahoe County Clerk and Recorder. Joan.
Hi, thank you for the invite, Congressman. As far as the dangers go, in my office, there's been, to me, a lot of dangers. We've gotten lots of email threats. We have lost several elections employees which have dedicated their life to the election process. It's really, really sad that now that we have legislation going in effect, because there was an incident at my office in Littleton where the threat of just even voting was a problem. We had 2 people come open carry, put a camera straight to the actual ballot box, and had an open carry and had the video camera while people were actually dropping their ballot in the drop box. Now the Secretary of State is doing some legislation and trying to make sure that that doesn't happen ever again. Phil Weiser actually is right. This can keep going on. This can keep happening. We need to make sure that our election workers are safe. As far as what we can do, my office has done several videos about how the transparency of just even running the election is. We have bipartisan teams. You can go to our arapahoevotes.com and show what the processes are on before the election, testing the equipment, and after doing a complete audit. We constantly get emails and still continue about the updates for the Dominion system, saying that we're purging records, which we're not. It's just an update. It just keeps making sure that the actual public is informed, making sure that everybody has access, so that there aren't laws that are going to put in effect. And I know, Congressman, you have seen several voting laws that or actual attempts to make law to stop the mail-in ballot, trying to make sure people need IDs, and making sure that we don't have a mail-in ballot process. There's so much that we can make sure that we, as a whole, are able to vote, and everybody has the right to vote. It has been, this January 6th has affected my office and my election workers tremendously. But I think that as long as we keep people informed and we are transparent about everything that's going on in the elections, I think that we can make sure that nothing else happens like this. But again, I don't think that it's not impossible that something like this could happen again.
Okay. Thank you, Joan. Next, we have Omar Montgomery. Omar.
Good afternoon, everyone. And it's good to see some familiar faces and some people that's been involved in this effort for a while. Congressman Crow, I want to thank you and State Attorney General Phil Weiser for just your remarks and commitment towards voter protection and voter education and voter rights. With that stated, January 6th, we experienced an attempt to destroy our democracy and destroy our faith in voting. The Aurora branch of the NAACP is committed. As a matter of fact, this is so timely. I believe, I got to read the email. I believe we just received the grant for doing social justice work, which is going to be strictly revolving around voter education and voter registration. Our goal, 100%, is to register as many people as possible between now and our primaries and after the primaries for the general election. That is our goal. We are committed. We have a team that we're going to be putting out at every single event to do voter registration / voter education, so that people are not getting caught up in the social media conspiracies and believing some of these things that's taking place that, can erode our faith in our voting process. as I begin to close, I just want to say that the state of Colorado is in a great space to be a model for the country on how we give everyone access to vote. And even some of the stuff we've done or recently, people that's been recently incarcerated in their right to vote. So for me and the Aurora branch of the NAACP, we're 100% committed, and we want the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to be voted on, and so that everyone federally would know their rights. And there's equity all across the country, that everyone has equal access to vote, and that some states are not trying to put in provisions that restrict some of our most disenfranchised populations from voting or making it difficult for them to vote. So with that stated, looking forward to working with you. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'll close there.
Thank you, Omar. I'm glad you mentioned the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which of course passed the House in August, when it would restore the Voting Rights Act and require the DOJ to conduct oversight of those regions with a history of discrimination. So we're working hard on that, and obviously need to keep on pushing in the Senate to get it done. Thank you. Next, we have Harry Budisidharta with the Asian Pacific Development Center.
Thank you, Congressman Crow. And that is a good question regarding what is the lessons from that January 6th. And I think people often take voting and democracy for granted because people think what could happen. I mean, speaking as an immigrant, I grew up in Indonesia back in 1990s when it was a dictatorship. We were allowed to vote, but our vote was meaningless. People know exactly who was going to win. The only question was whether the current dictator was going to win with 90% approval or 95% approval. So I never take voting for granted. I certainly appreciate all of the hard work that the Joan Lopez, you and your staff do to ensure our voting integrity. And I think what we need to do, the lessons is that we need elected officials and our leaders to take a strong stance and to say that what happened on January 6th is not acceptable, and that voting is one of our most important rights, and that we should do everything that we can to make sure that people are educated, people have access, and that there is no voter intimidation. Because I'm afraid that without voting, without the rule of law, then our country is in a very dark path toward dictatorship. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Harry. Beth Hendrix with the League of Women Voters.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. It's great to see so many current and future partners. On January 8th of 2021, the League of Colorado held a membership meeting in response to the insurrection, and we had about 500 of our members show up at very short notice. There was a lot of shock and despair, and that continues. What also continues is motivation to stop this. And the League will be working in a number of ways to try to combat the mis and disinformation campaigns. Particularly, we're focusing on media literacy and news literacy. And we're looking forward to some state legislation on that. And we're also working on civics education, both at the K through 12 level and for the many, many Coloradans, including myself, who are not in the K-12 system. There's a lot of confusion about what is constitutional and what is not. And maybe if we can get to the heart of that problem, it'll help. We are with many partners, including on this call, holding a rally on Thursday, the 6th at noon on the west steps of the Capitol to mark this anniversary and to ask for accountability of our leaders. Cameron is joining us. Cameron, really looking forward to that. Salvador, Rosemary Lytle of the NAACP, but Omar would love to have you. Really, anyone is welcome, of course. So please join us at noon on the west steps of the Capitol to continue to call for accountability and make sure people stay motivated to fix this problem that is threatening our democracy in a way that it never has before. Thank you.
Thank you, and glad to hear that you're putting together on the 6th. Thank you. Next, Owen Perkins with Clean.
Great. Hey, thanks, Jason, for putting this together, and thanks for your leadership on this issue, starting from back when you were campaigning and some of your earliest legislation, and working on the For the People Act, and now the Freedom to Vote Act, among others, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. But I think when you ask about the dangers, I think we saw, obviously, the danger of nearly having an election stolen from us, stolen from the American people, the will of the American voters overturned nearly. And that obviously was among the big dangers of January 6th last year. For me, the danger that I fear the most is in the future, and is moving from that process of attempting to steal an election to moving into a process of attempting to legislate being able to legally overturn the will of the voters and the will of the people. And that's in some ways a more fearsome future than what we were able to overcome, thanks to all your leadership. I think people did respond appropriately in a lot of ways on January 6th, and in some ways relatively admirably, which sounds like a low bar to meet, but with people, for the most part, condemning the insurrection, and elected officials condemning the insurrection, condemning the leadership of the president at that time, corporations pledging to not fund those who were involved in the insurrection, elected officials who were involved in the insurrection. And I think we have seen a little bit, some of that obviously has gone away. A lot of those who initially condemned the insurrectionists went to 180-degree turnarounds and kind of denying that it happened. Corporations have started funding those Congresspeople who were involved again, and who voted against ratifying the Electoral College. So that's fearsome, and I think trying to keep the issues that people cared about and that brought people together, and that became top of mind, trying to keep that top of mind as we move forward is an important challenge. I think the Freedom to Vote Act, which I hope we'll have a vote on in the next couple of weeks, so much of that, it's worth pointing out, is not new or revolutionary or anything like that. So much of it is in effect in Colorado. Things like early voting, mail voting, protection for individuals with disabilities, nonpartisan redistricting, same-day voter registration, protection against unlawful voter purges, campaign finance transparency, small donor matching, and enhanced enforcement. All those are things that are already in effect in Colorado and have been leading to making us the model for safe and secure and fair elections. We've also seen, and I think one of the things that we can do, and that so many people on this call have been involved with, is putting those elements into action at the grassroots level and at the local level, and hoping to build from there. And we have seen over the past few years, Denver, Lakewood, and Aurora all passed major campaign finance reform laws, and Fort Collins, Thornton, and Colorado Springs currently pursuing those, their own reforms, substantial reforms. These are the 6 biggest cities in Colorado, and give us a great foothold on moving, from the local level to the state level and the national level, and building that support from the foundation up. So I think that's a really important movement. to go in, and you can see just a couple of the places where it's gone into effect. In Denver, where we're in the middle of the first cycle, but people are just starting to declare for office in municipal elections, and they've got the 9-to-1 public financing that's very similar and was developed in cohort, in consultation with Congressman Sarbanes as he was developing the For the People Act. That of all the candidates who have filed for election in Denver in 2023 cycle, 100% of them are opting in for public financing so far. So that's fantastic progress. And in Aurora, where they just completed the first election with the new reforms, we went, everything is, the idea of getting big money out of politics has been succeeding. If you look at the 2011, 13, 15, and 17 election cycles, there were 26 donations of $5,000 or more. In 2019, there were 99 donations of $5,000 or more. And in 2021, there was one donation of $5,000 or more. It was illegal and had to be returned. Everything's moving in the right direction, Aurora, maybe not as quick as we want to see, but we've gone from something like 56% of all candidates' money coming from individuals to 84% in the most recent election. We went from an average contribution in 2019 of $343 to an average contribution of $140 in 2021, so more than in half. And even self-financing went from 15% in 2019 to 5% in 2021. So things are moving in the right direction. We can make that progress at the local level. That's been a priority for CleanSlateNow action ever since Ken Gordon founded it. But I do think, I'm glad to see the small donor empowerment part of the act is still in effect. But these other things that Colorado has already enacted, the voter protection things, the things that ensure people's vote can get in and count, the same-day registration, the mail ballots, the drop boxes, all of that, that's essential that we move forward on that and create that national foundation that can overcome this movement at the state legislature to legalize stealing elections, just as we've already legalized corruption with our campaign finance systems. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Owen. And some cause for hope, at least in Colorado. We're moving in that direction, and some of those numbers certainly are encouraging and shows we lead the way. So thank you for reviewing that. Next, we have Bobby Pace with Aurora Community College.
So thank you for having me. It's kind of an odd thing because I've been in for the past 48 hours. I've been in COVID response team meetings as we get ready to start the semester here, and this is honestly the only conversation that makes that look more appealing because the reality is this has a more timely and more present impact for our students and for the folks within our community. So, there are a few things that really illustrate some concerns that we've noticed here at the college. We've seen since January 6th, we've seen a significant increase in the number of folks who are wanting to use what we refer to as our free space zones. That are more radicalized movements, movements that are not normally on our college campuses. And as we move away from a virtual environment to a face-to-face environment, we have seen the presence of hate groups on campuses throughout the Front Range over the past few years. And we've seen that increase. So that's a concern. Personally, that I have, especially for our students who, if you all aren't aware, the Community College of Aurora we serve the most diverse student population in the state of Colorado, in higher education at least. And we serve a very vulnerable population in many instances. And this college provides a safe space for them that having challenges to that has more of tangible effect on them than it may in some of the other community colleges across the state. So that's a major concern. As a political scientist, one of the things that is really troubling to me, and I used to talk about this in my classes, and I could say it before the 2020 election, but I used to say after 2000 and after 2016, both instances in which the popular vote getter was not the electoral vote getter, there was still even though that fundamentally feels anti-democratic. You can have discussions about the Electoral College at any other point in time, right? It feels fundamentally anti-democratic. But one of the things that I would always say is there was a belief in the actual process. Whether there was a belief in the system and the validity of the system is one thing, but there was a feeling of validity in the process of voting. And as weird as the Electoral College system is, folks understood that there was a rational reason behind it, and that there was essentially a logic that this country had followed. And so you didn't see the riots in the street in 2000 and in 2016. You certainly saw protest, you certainly saw frustration, but you also saw a willingness to accept the results of the election, even if they were not something that felt inherently democratic. And that all changed after 2020 for two reasons. One, not only the January 6th insurrection, but also the unwillingness of the president at the time to accept the validity and outcome of the election, and the commercialization, ultimately, of an entire cottage industry geared towards perpetuating this idea that the election was stolen. Or I've seen actually I live in Broomfield. We were 2.5 miles from the fire evacuation zone, so it was a pretty frightening time for us last week. And we have one individual in our neighborhood who weekly buys their latest flags, their protest flags, and their latest one is just steal the election already and take it. And there is this odd kind of sense that the process not only doesn't matter among voters, but that elections, once we've opened the door towards violence in the election process, that becomes something that I think is frightening as we contemplate the normalization, ultimately, of violence within the election process. Two things that I think that are important that we could consider, and it's been spoken about already, or at least touched on, is really this idea of expansion and maintaining, but expansion of mail-in ballots, of early voting, of easier access. I remember when I lived in Virginia, and it was most people forget this, but it was a Republican cause to have motor voter registration back in the day, right? Because it'd get more people to the polls, and you see those same individuals wanting to roll that back because, unfortunately, it's gotten more people to the polls, and it makes access to registration more acceptable or more accessible for folks. So maintaining and preserving that as best we can is obviously important. But another thing that I think is key, and Joan, this is where I think your area has so much potential, because I did this actually when I was a kid. Are the idea of getting folks more involved in the actual election observation process and demystifying the process of voting and calculation of those votes. I think once anyone has an opportunity to really be a poll observer, even with mail-in ballots. I know it's not quite the same these days, but the idea of understanding the real role that ultimately citizens can play in the process of observing and essentially being a check against voter fraud in the process, and understanding that, I think is something that we as a country can do better at expanding and promoting, which personalizes it in a way from the videos, right? Or the websites, or kind of the discussions. Like, we know that there is a experiential aspect to essentially education, and that folks can read about the integrity of an election on paper, but physically seeing what that process looks like, the redundancies that are put in place, and ultimately the great work that so many folks do to ensure the integrity of the process. It will not change everyone's mind, but I think that it will go a long way to change the minds of folks who are persuadable. So thank you all.
Thank you, Bobby. Really appreciate those thoughts, and how sobering to hear your report, frankly, about the rise of hate groups on campus, and particularly in Aurora. It's a very disturbing trend. Next,
Congressman
we have...
Crow, may I say something really quick?
Yes, Joan.
Quick. So, just Bobby, you're completely right. I mean, when I did my tours all the time, I can't tell you how many times people said, I'm going to tell all my friends to take this tour. I'm going to tell them about the process and how many people's hands are into it, and the bipartisanship, and the transparency, and all the cameras, and on and on. And I can't tell you how many times people loved the tour, recommended somebody to take the tour. Unfortunately, during COVID, of course, we had to go to videos. But then we expanded that, and just having that knowledge on what exactly each process is and how we get to those results, especially now, I have to tell you, I quit calling the hate calls about whether or not we fraudulently selected the winner. I stopped calling because no matter what I said, it just didn't, they didn't want to believe what the process was. And if they came and saw that process and saw exactly everything that goes into just counting and the bipartisanship and the transparency, I think that a lot of people would really, really feel a lot differently about the process. Unfortunately, they're listening to naysayers and wanting to stop the still sort of comments on media, unfortunately. But thank you for saying that. That is an important piece, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. Appreciate it. Lisa Duran with the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you to all of you on this call who are doing amazing work to defend democracy. You know, the population that I work with, many of them cannot vote. They are not citizens. But luckily, democracy does not depend only on voters. And let's please remember that it's not only the voting rights, it's not only the ability to cast a vote, it's also the democracy that we set up that allows people access to government services, and also things like free speech. And one of the things that's most disturbing to me is that we have members of our coalition who will not participate in public protest because when they do, people drive by with automatic assault rifles to intimidate them from exercising their free speech. And so what we are doing at the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition is working to build new leadership, because clearly that's what's needed. We don't have enough leaders at the national level who are inclusive enough, who will vote for a path to citizenship, for instance. And so and thank you so much, Representative Crow, for your excellent stand on these issues, and your leadership on these issues. But we need a pipeline so that our leaders can reflect who our country actually is. And we're developing a leadership academy, a statewide leadership academy, so that we can build the pipeline of new leaders to take office in Colorado and move up that pipeline to the national level. But also, we also want to strengthen community at the local level, because really all power starts at the local level. And so when we send our leaders to Washington, they can count on a community, a network within our communities that can deliver the kind of power that needs to be reflected at the national level. Really, I feel like it's so important. And all of the work that is happening by people who would like to restrict the franchise, they want to restrict people who are in, incarcerated at county jails who've not even been charged or even convicted. They want to take the vote away from. There are so many different ways that that's being assaulted, the right to vote and the right to participate in democracy. And I think we want to plant our flag in the sand about inclusion, that we all have a powerful voice and we all have gifts to contribute. And voting is one very, very important way to do that. We will be supporting the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but we also, we do need to build new leaders in communities, including people who cannot vote, because their voices, even if they can't vote, their voices are very, very important. So Representative Crow, again, thank you so much for your leadership and your courage. And I just hope we can get 50 more leaders like you. And we're going to try to work on that with you.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, we appreciate the work you do. It's tough work and in so many ways getting tougher, but it's good to know you're there with your coalition doing it. So thank you. Next, Stephanie Walsh, who is doing incredible work trying to activate our young folks, educate them on the system as a civics teacher in Aurora Public Schools. So Stephanie, over to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I already have like 4 pages of notes. I don't even know where to start. I started classes today. I have some background, 30 years teaching, all of them in poli-sci and sociology. I teach adjunct at CCA at night, American Gov, brought students to DC for inaugurations, been doing that for years. The question I had today when I first met my civics students was, what do you know? What do you want to know? And a lot of them, it's so negative. And these are young, impressionable students. And they don't want to listen, when you have an insurrection or you have representatives that get banned on Twitter or threats. Well, I deal with students that's their life that they live in, it's safe to be at home. They're going to tune it all out and they're not going to participate because it is so negative. So we rewrote curriculum this last semester for civics. We have it in Aurora Public Schools. The last time we did that was 2006. And we have focused more on civic reasoning and critical thinking and media literacy. Social media has changed high school education. And so I am dealing with the population, how it's really, really hard. I don't actually have a whole bunch of answers, but I do know the education piece, like, Joan, I was thinking of, I wonder if we could start taking some, and COVID doesn't help, and COVID didn't help at all because they sat at home and looked at screens on their, on the phones. Do we take students then to see the process? In the state of Colorado, civics education is only a semester. Now, I grew up in Kansas, so I had American government for a full year. So I'm charged with 17 weeks. Remember, a lot of that's taken. I got a week of testing. I have 16 weeks to teach 17 and 18-year-olds about civic education and hit standards. We can't hit it. We don't, it's surface. We don't go deep. They don't get to do a community project, which we know engages students. Like, I know I have students that would love to go work with Mr. Montgomery and what do they do? And on the other end, what I see here in the system is they don't trust the government to do the right thing to help them at all. There is no trust. So what I told them today is I always say we need to start handing out constitutions. That's our textbook. And we read the preamble today, and it says, in order to form a more perfect union. I said, we're not perfect yet, but we got to work on getting there. What do we need to change, and what voice do you have? They did a civic profile today, what they want. And I'm willing, if you guys want to reach out to me, the news literacy is huge for these guys. And they need to see their people in political power. Why are people in Congress so old, Mrs. Walsh? And I'm at the end of my teaching career here in another year. Our current president is older than my parents. Why don't they have term limits? Why, there is no connection, personal connection, with my students in the national government. I teach a state and local politics class for CCA, and my students tend to enjoy that more because I can't remember who said it. They see the power of local and community politics much more for them. And so we need to increase that subject matter into our civics classes. But I don't know how to do it in 16 weeks. I think we need to, and then it dropped because of testing. I have students that come in at 16 years old that have never taken any social studies with civics because they were behind in their English or they didn't read well, so they made them do double things in middle school and not take a civics class or social studies because it's not tested. We've kind of created our own problem. And so how do we fix that? Is we have to be really deliberate and intentional on what we're teaching our students about where they can find a hope. That's what they're looking for in positive, and maybe they just shouldn't even be on social media. I mean, they ask, and that they have to understand, it's hard to do stuff about Georgia when you're in Colorado and she gets banned from Twitter. I don't have an answer for him. I used to have answers for him. I think the last 8 years, and I've been teaching since 1992, have been the hardest years I've ever had to teach government, because I've never seen things happen that have happened. And I don't have the answers because I'm looking at the same Constitution and it's not what they're supposed to do. So that's kind of where I'm at. So that doesn't really help too many of you, I don't think. But willing to, come up with some ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, go with.
I think that Congressman line froze there. Congressman, were you trying to introduce Cameron Hill next? See you back.
Yeah. I'm losing my connection.
Go ahead, Cameron.
Cameron Hill with Common Cause. Cameron.
Thank you. Thanks, Congressman, for having us here, convening this panel, and for all your work that you've done so far on this issue. For me and for us, I think there's been so many things mentioned so far, and I think all of it comes back to the issue of disinformation. I think when we think about January 6th, we need to remember that it was the culmination of a multi-year campaign put on by the former president to undermine public confidence in our election infrastructure. And then it was just the beginning of what has now been a year-long coordinated attack on our democracy. And I think that's, some of the things that our Attorney General alluded to earlier. But I think the goal of this has been to make what the January 6th insurrectionists attempted to do not only possible, but legal. So they've been using disinformation to do multiple things, and they've all been mentioned here, but to reiterate, they're using it to justify the passage of bills across the country that will suppress the vote of certain people. Those namely Black and brown voters, young voters, urban voters. And it's also being used to pass laws that will change the rules of how our elections are administered and make it easier to subvert those free and fair elections. And I think that disinformation is being used to, sow distrust toward our bipartisan election workers. As Clerk Lopez alluded to, she's lost folks in her office because of this explosion of threats of violence and harassment to these civil servants who are just trying to securely count and administer our elections, right? And disinformation is being used to destroy the public confidence in our elections, and thus plant, even in some folks, unfortunately, seeds of violence as a response to a non-existent stolen election. And so I will say in Colorado, we've been lucky to have avoided the anti-democratic legislation that we've seen in places like Georgia and Texas, but we've certainly not been insulated from those other things. And so I think that that it is the foundation upon which, the January 6th attack happened and everything else that's resulted from it. And so I think what we need to do is really think about how we can combat disinformation. For us at Common Cause, we're going to do that through our Just Vote voter protection effort, where we will provide accurate information. We'll work with county clerks to make sure that all the information that we give is accurate, but also that we identify inaccurate information and even malicious information. We do have laws in Colorado that prevent people from actively spreading incorrect information about, the date and time and other things to do with it. And so we will do that through our effort. And I think we will work with a lot of other organizations to do that. But I also think we need to count on elected officials to help make sure that they are not promoting disinformation, that they are holding their colleagues accountable to do that. And I know that's not an easy thing to say when, we have Congressman Crow who, operates with integrity, and then some of his colleagues in Congress may not. But I think that we can look to the elected officials and try to encourage folks to hold them accountable. And then I think it's important that, we think about disinformation, but also we are actively supporting the federal legislation that Beth and other folks have alluded to that we will be having a rally for on Thursday, because I think the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act will also help prevent these dangerous bills and laws that are being passed across the country. I think that's where we're coming from. I think, I think what you're doing, Stephanie, at the school is extremely important, and I have to commend you for your work over the last 2 years. It's been, I'm sure, so challenging, but making sure that folks, that our students are being educated so that they have the tools to recognize and identify and see this disinformation and think for themselves as well. So I think that's where we're coming from. It's a huge task, and I'm really glad that we have lots of folks like leaders like you, Congressman Crow, and then everyone else on this call. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. Really appreciate your words and all your work. And last, and definitely not least, is Salvador Hernandez, the state director for Colorado for Familia, Vota. Salvador, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation, Congressman, and thank you all for being in this call. I think that so much of what you all have said can really be, condensed to, defending democracy is everyone's business and everyone's responsibility. I think, like for us at Mi Familia Vota, what we think is the best way to combat disinformation and then to inspire confidence in our election process is, doing basic things like, increasing the investment that we have in, discriminated communities or marginalized communities, like, the Latino community specifically is the community that we work with. At Mi Familia Vota, we have, continuously throughout, for at least the last 10 years in Colorado, have been working to increase the Latino electorate. We think that participation is a great way to combat a lot of these things that we see, misinformation, distrust in the system. I think the elected officials, and more particularly in our state, the clerks and the secretary of state play a big role into making sure that people have confidence in our election system. But we also, believe in, mobilizing people to the polls. So, after we create massive voter registration drives to help register, particularly Latinos, to vote, we do see a gap in terms of the outreach that comes from different entities, whether it's nonprofits like Mi Familia Vota, nonpartisan elected offices, and elected officials, and the parties themselves, in terms of like the outreach that they do to the Latino community, I think is lacking, particularly the Spanish-speaking community in our state. So I think we can all do better at that. We have, partnered with several of you in terms of expanding, the electorate, making sure that people have the information that they need in a language that they need. We saw great attacks to our election system in Colorado, but we also saw some great wins last year. And at the state legislature, we saw the multilingual ballot access bill that Common Cause pushed last year. We think that's a great step forward into making sure that people have more accessible information so that they can vote and they can participate in the process. And then finally, to what Lisa was saying about alluding to creating a pipeline of leaders that come from all different backgrounds. We also believe that that's a great way also to combat misinformation and disinformation, making sure that the people that are in those elected offices do look like the community that they serve. And finally, as a way to sort of like inspire others to participate. That's something that I've been doing for the last 6 to 8 years of my life when I joined this organization, is that I am still not able to vote till this day. I'm not a U.S. citizen yet. I will be, or hopefully I will be able to vote in the next presidential election once I am able to become a citizen, but I haven't let that discourage me. And I think that's a great lesson to learn and something that I preach everywhere I go, particularly with young students when we go to schools, is to say that, even if you cannot participate in the process, it is also our duty to defend the electoral process and the right to vote. And, as Mi Familia Vota continues to do its work, we will continue to preach on those values. And, again, we thank all of you for the hard work that you do. And we have many great challenges ahead of us. But I think that if we all act in good faith and we work hard, we can achieve great things. So thank you again for putting this roundtable together, Congressman, and I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Salvador. Well, what a great roundtable! Incredible thoughts, observations, and leadership as well. I mean, it's very easy, I think, sometimes to get dispirited, to feel this sense of hopelessness setting in, because the things that are endangering our community and our vulnerable friends and neighbors and threatening our democracy seem to be coming from every different direction. Right, we're facing this almost perfect storm of disinformation and misinformation, the normalization of violence, attacks on the voting rights system, so many things coming from so many different directions all the time. But having a group like this and just hearing about the work you're doing and the fact that, not only do you understand this in a deep way, but you're organizing to combat it and you're mobilizing to combat it. So a couple of takeaways. We heard about the need to pass voting rights legislation. Colorado is doing well. Local municipalities are doing well. But this is really, as the saying goes, the long pole in the tent. Unless we pass some basic voting rights protection, almost nothing else matters going forward. So that has got to be our number one priority, which is for me right now in Washington, D.C., to make sure that we are protecting that right to vote to so many people. So many people have given so much for in America over our history. One is education, the need to educate folks and to really level set, basic civics in America and what it means and what our history. And part of that is also demystifying the election process, as Joan and others talked about, is really letting people know how safe and secure this process is, how many checks there are in this process, how our 2020 election was likely the most safe and secure election in American history, and letting people know why that is really important. Civic engagement, the need to engage in our civic life and our civic organizations, to stand up. That saying that our democracy is run by those who show up has never been more true. So show up, stand for truth, stand for a democracy, and don't stop standing up. And of course, the need to have poll watchers and volunteers and others engaged in that process, people that are committed to a free and fair, open election, and making sure that people can safely exercise the franchise remains important. So those are just a few of the takeaways for me today, and really wonderful points by everybody. And then the last thing is I want to just point out again, so there is an event on January 6th, and Beth, did you want to just give the details about that again?
West steps of the state capitol at noon. The Rally to Save Our Democracy will be pushing for passage of the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis VRAA. The League of Women Voters also throws statehood for the District of Columbia in there, as too many of our American citizens have been taxed without proper representation. But I doubt I'll bring that up on Thursday. But please do, everyone, come tell everyone you know. This is heading towards crisis, and this call has been so reassuring that so many people are working on it, but it's still scary.
Thank you, Beth. Well, our democracy, one of the lessons of the last couple of years is our democracy is only as good as the people who are willing to stand up and fight for it. No institution, no tradition, no piece of paper will protect us. It's just at the end of the day, people who are willing to stand up and do the work and stand together. So we came close to losing our democracy in 2021 with the attempted insurrection in the Capitol. Let's make 2022 the year that we save it. So thank you all, and onward and upward.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you. And Beth, thank you for the link on the rally.
Pleasure. I hope to see you all there.
Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm available by email if you have any follow-up questions or anything you want to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and Happy New Year.
Recording stopped.
Working with everyone. Enjoy.